Hi, Andrew. Welcome to the Creative Studio Insider podcast.
Thanks, Vicky Ann. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
It is lovely to meet you as well. For those who don't know, Andrew Green is the head of design at Canva. And what a great career you've had. Perhaps you can give us a quick overview, Andrew, of your career journey so far.
Yeah, sure. Well, I started out actually in software engineering, but quickly realized that I preferred designing software rather than actually writing it. So I started out in a role where I was doing a lot of front-end engineering in a consulting capacity, learned a lot. Can definitely recommend that to people starting out. But then realized that I wanted to go pretty deep on user experience design. So I went over to the US for a while, worked with some of, at the time, some of my idols, because there wasn't much of a UX scene in Australia back then. Came back, worked for Seek for a while, worked for myself for a while, went back over to Hong Kong and China, worked over there for a while, just to kind of get some international experience, and loved working in that region. Again, can really recommend people getting those sorts of experiences in their career and applying them in different cultural settings. The whole time I was doing a lot of product design though. So that's my background, has been leading product design teams, UX teams, research teams. I did have a stint leading a product management team, which was actually really, really interesting. Again, can recommend that. People jumping out on their own comfort area. And then right now in a role at Canva, which is really exciting, leading a team of amazing designers here back in Australia now. And we do have an international team, but yeah, it's so exciting to sort of lead a team that's sort of so varied and kind of encapsulate, to be honest, a lot of my own background. So there's a lot of graphic design that I've sort of always been interested in. There's product design, obviously, but also we have a branding team internally. I've always been interested in branding and worked in and around brands, even when I was in product. So I'm pretty lucky, actually. I feel pretty lucky to have this role. It sort of feels like the best of all the little bits I've done in my career.
Will come together. I think it's, it's unlikely that our listeners, excuse me, haven't heard of Canva. But what can you tell us about the company that we may not know, and what about your role is so unique?
Yeah, so I mean, Canva is an online design platform. We're on a mission to enable the whole world to design. I guess people that have used the tool probably have made a social media graphic, maybe even a presentation, hopefully. But also we do lots and lots of other things as well around videos. You can create t-shirts. We're getting into a lot more image editing, and even data visualizations as well, which I guess is the bread and butter of Canva, which is really how can you take a technology that might be really difficult to use from a professional's point of view and give that and democratize that for everyone. So that's really like the mission that we're on at Canva, is to simplify a lot of those hard to use tools and make it easy for everyone to use them. I guess my role is pretty unique in that I am product design, but also try to unite a lot of our other designers together. A big part of what makes Canva so successful is that it's so simple to use, and simple design, simple UX looks easy, but it's actually really hard to pull off because it requires getting a lot of people aligned, getting everyone focused on the same problem, making sure that everyone sort of also has the same values around simplicity, I think, which is like the biggest thing that we have internally. I guess one thing that maybe people don't know about Canva as much is how we are really focused on our community, and we care so much about our community that we obsess about how people are using Canva, but also we want to do the most good in the world. And so a large part of what we do at Canva as well is design for good. We do a lot of work with not-for-profits, and that we have a Canva Foundation as well, which is a huge part of what we do as well, making that sort of impact out there in the community. So it's kind of part of this two-step mission to create a really valuable company, but also do the most good that we can in the world.
What are some of the things that the foundation is doing?
So we've been doing some really interesting stuff around giving directly, which you can read about on our blogs, where we're working with this charity that helps people in really poor countries, giving them actual cash directly to use, which we find actually has the biggest impact in those regions. We've been doing a lot of that lately. We've done a cool little thing recently with a billboard provider out in New Zealand, where they have time where they don't have any clients to do any advertising on their billboards, and so we actually have some of our graphic designers create really engaging creative work for not-for-profits, and then we partner with the outdoor billboard providers to actually put them up in really visible parts in New Zealand. So yeah, things like that kind of a big part of what we do that people may not really know about.
I want to address the elephant in the room, because you've worked at Seek and now you're at Canva, and I can remember when Seek was first launched, there were recruiters out there going, oh my gosh, is this the end of our career? We're still here, so obviously it wasn't, but it felt like a real threat. And I know that there are definitely people probably listening to the podcast today that have felt a little bit like that, particularly the designers out there when Canva first emerged. What are your thoughts around that, given that you worked at both Seek and now at Canva? I bet you're the person that can answer this better than anyone.
Yeah, I mean, we at Canva say design is for everyone, and that includes designers. We're not excluding designers in that. And from my own background as a designer, especially in my early days where I was doing more graphic design and working with clients, one of the biggest pain points was actually rolling out that design. So you'd spend a lot of time with the brand, figuring out how to create and craft a brand that will speak really clearly for your client. And then you hand over all the assets and all the graphic design files and the logos, and then they maybe don't execute out there, like where your hands are off it. And I know that used to frustrate me a lot as a designer. So we see our role as not taking over that creative part, that really amazing work that those professional designers do, especially around branding, campaign work and that kind of thing. But instead, we want them to be able to use or feel comfortable in Canva to implement their brand with their client, because we know that their clients and their marketing departments and their sales departments are actually really comfortable using Canva. So we've got things like brand kits, templates, branded templates, where the designers can actually create, translate their amazing brand work into Canva in a way that then their clients can use and not stuff up. It's actually like roll it out through Canva and making sure that it actually stays consistent, that it's true to brand. So we've put a lot of effort actually lately into making professional designers feel at home in Canva. A good sort of analogy that I like to use, maybe if I'm speaking directly to designers here, is the role that InDesign used to play in the whole design process, where in design, you didn't create, your intricate vector artwork or touch up your photography in InDesign, but you use InDesign as a tool to kind of bring it all together for your clients. And we sort of feel like we're similar in a way. Where we have that role to play. And I think we've definitely got work to do. Like we're putting a lot of work into making Canva more precise, giving people more precision tools, those things that professional designers really want. But yeah, we think we have a positive role to play in that workflow, so that designers can just focus on solving really deep problems rather than kind of all the finicky stuff that they might have to do otherwise.
You've worked across different cities in Australia, you've worked in New York, Hong Kong. Tell us a little bit about how you think Australia compares to some of those other countries that you've worked in terms of design.
Yeah, I think that in my experience, Australian designers tend to be more general and pragmatic. And what I mean by that is we tend to have a view on the outcome more than the process itself. And so we're happy to dive into different parts of design to get the outcome that we need. I think that we have this sort of, I don't know, this sense of ownership on the whole outcome. And so that means we'll go and talk to another person, maybe in another part of the business, to get the thing done as a designer. Whereas maybe in other settings, people are more likely to go deep on their craft. And it just means that in my experience, I've seen Australian designers be more open to go and reach out to other parts of whatever business they're working in or whatever brand they're working in to sort of get a really good outcome. And I think that comes from a place of, being like really pragmatic. If you're growing up if you're starting your career as a designer in Australia, you're more likely to be doing quite a few different types of design than starting out, say, in the US, where they have a really deep talent pool. So you might in the US already start to get a niche really early in your design career compared to in Australia, where I think it takes a bit more time. So that's something I noticed very similar in other parts of the world. I did find that in China, working with Chinese designers, they're actually a little bit more like-minded to Australians in designers, in that they do like to kind of go wide as well and get a whole bunch of things done. We've got so much more in common though than we have different. And one other thing I think with Australian designers is that we are, I think, a little bit more internationally minded, I find. Maybe just in my experience, working with Australian designers that have been a bit more connected to their international audience, say. So they're more likely to think about, how is this design going to work in Thailand, where they've got really long letters and really long words, and how is that going to break our design? Or how is this design going to work in a right to left environment, say in the Middle East? So it's kind of those kinds of things I think we're more naturally thinking about, just because we are this tiny nation in the around in the South Pacific, rather than sort of being in the mix of it as much in the Northern Hemisphere. But I think that's an advantage that we have.
And out of all the companies that you've worked for, I mean, you've been at Deloitte, Seek, and now Canva, which one do you think has pushed your creativity the most?
Oh, look, definitely Canva, I have to say. Just being part of this growth at Canva as well. I've enjoyed my stints in all the other places I've worked, but I think in terms of trying to figure out how to get this brand and how to get this tool that is super international, like it's 65% of our traffic is actually non-English speaking, has just sort of straight away set up the environment to be really creative, because you have to think about how is this going to work in all these different countries? How is this going to work with all these different contexts that people have? That's definitely pushed my creative sort of skills the most with Canva. And as well, because it's sort of, we've had to think a lot on first principles, because there wasn't much there for us to work with, especially like in the brand. We had to sort of do a lot of brand workshops and figure out exactly, we were very confident internally, like who we were as a brand. But then when we had to go and speak out to the rest of the world, that was kind of exciting, like trying to figure out like, how are we going to communicate our humanity? We want to be really inspiring for our audience. We want to show that we're really creative and we want to help people achieve their goals. So that's been really awesome to do. And at Canva, it's definitely Canva has been the place that's sort of made me push my creativity the most.
What are some of the brands that you really admire at the moment, and why?
Maybe it's just recency bias, but I just finished the Ronnie Carnes, who's the founder of Oz Harvest. I just finished her biography called A Life Repurposed. And I just fell in love with the mission that she was on at Oz Harvest, which is a charity around helping repurpose leftover food for those that need it. Maybe it's because at the moment at Canva, we are thinking a lot about these kinds of themes as well, that sort of those kinds of brands are the ones that are sort of appealing to me at the moment, those really high impact community brands. But if you want to go sort of, just aesthetics, I really geeked out on the Nike Space Hippie branding that was probably 18 months ago. Just an amazing aesthetic, but also the story behind using all of these scraps of, leftover shoe bits of the factory floor and creating this new, very unique product. I think was really cool, especially for a brand like Nike that, is addressing, again, like the elephant in the room, like using their practices in the factory. So I really like that kind of stuff, where there's brands that are really pushing things and being really pushing themselves, and you can kind of see that. So I think, yeah, those are probably two that come to mind. I guess one more is Spotify. I mean, they've just from a pure tech point of view, I think they've always had this amazing brand that goes from their actual branding campaign work that they do through to the product itself. And so when you're using the product, you can kind of feel that same design system coming through. I know that they've definitely got some recently some PR issues around some of the content.
Bring that up.
But I guess just from a pure aesthetic and branding and product point of view, from a content point of view, definitely wouldn't hold them up at the moment.
And can you talk us through the tech stack that you're currently working with and how your team collaborates creatively?
Yeah, so I mean, Canva is it's a cross-platform tech stack. So that just means that our designers have to constantly think about how is this thing that I'm designing going to work on every device you can imagine, in every context you can imagine. And so that's really difficult. And so I guess the way that we work is very much, and I'm talking more about like the product designers, is in a triad. So very, very close with their engineering leadership, very close with product management. And the designers sort of work in a way where they think very, very deeply across the whole tech stack. So they're thinking, how is this thing going to work on someone's low-end Android phone? And how is this thing going to work on somebody that's using our, on a high-end MacBook Pro? So we actually make sure that designers in our team are thinking through that whole thing. We don't have like a mobile team and that kind of separation, because we feel like it's up to everybody to own their part of the surface area of the product and think about it from that cross-platform point of view. So there's that side of it. Also, our product designers they have to understand their part of the product and how it works technically. I think it's really important, not just Canva, but any UX or product design needs to understand what are the back-end services that are driving this thing? What are the limitations? How does it work? What are the mechanics of this thing, how it works? We make sure that our designers, are deeply involved in that. It just means, honestly, it just means having really good conversations and connections and trusted relationships with engineering leadership in your team. That's so important. And it's really good way to kind of move things forward quickly, to make sure you're also designing with performance in mind. That's something that's huge for us as well. Making sure that our designers are, you're not coming up with designs that will actually slow the experience down. We want to make sure that the user experience is really performant, really fast. So there's that. I guess one other thing that we do think of as well in terms of tech stack, and it's not really tech, but it's so important, is accessibility. So we want to make sure that the Canva product is as accessible to the most people in the world as possible. And that means, again, our product designers have their part of the product that they love, that they own. It has to be accessible and has to think about that whole tech stack of accessibility as well, making sure that we're compliant and so forth.
What's the main difference in your experience managing small teams versus large scale international ones?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a lot of similarities. It's just the scale, right? The word scale is really important. And I think that when you're operating on a smaller scale, you tend to take care of a lot of the craft. So the quality bar of the team, the camaraderie. So just the culture of the team, making sure that the team is, has a good pace and a good environment and a safe environment to work in, and doing things like critiques that are really, really crucial to the design process. And you're still having, the conversations as a design leader on smaller teams. You're still talking to individual contributors, but you're talking to them about their own growth, and you're talking to them about their leadership conversations and how can you improve, and how can you improve your communication or your strategy thinking, whatever it might be. You're still having that conversation, but then when you go to a larger scale, you end up having that with a set of trusted leads. And I'm really, really lucky to have a amazingly talented lead team. And it's the same conversations, it's just on a different scale. It's like, okay, what can you improve in your own performance and your own growth to achieve your goals? And what can you do to, in terms of your strategy and how you're thinking about, your part of the product and your team? I will say that it does become a little bit meta for me, especially because I am talking to my leads about how they can bring camaraderie and craft and quality, high quality bars to their team. And I think it really does help to have had that journey where I've done that myself for a while, and then sort of in a role where I can kind of see these leads now building it themselves. And it's really satisfying actually to see those teams like kind of grow. And we like to sort of think that our design teams that we have under our leads are kind of like little villages that have their own like culture. They stand for something, and it's not like a monoculture across our design teams. Like our design teams are all very, very different. And I like that. It kind of gives the whole thing a bit of personality. So it's about growing that kind of, I don't know, all those little villages in the design team, which is still the same sort of, you're just operating at a bigger scale, but it's still the same conversations, still the same sort of type of communication that you need.
So when was the first time you remember realizing that you were a creative person?
Oh, okay. I don't know. I think that it's always been something with me. I guess I've always been interested in, so early on, always, bit of a geek, bit of a nerd. So operating in and around computers and trying to write, software and, but always feeling like I had an aesthetic sense to what I was doing, especially I think as I got older and got into uni, and I sort of noticed that I was actually I can probably answer the question in that there were some early assignments that I did in uni when I was doing software engineering where I cared a little bit more, actually a lot more, about the user interface of what I was designing than the how the back end was going to be, designed to be really efficient. Like I could do that, but I really cared more deeply about how the thing looked on the front end. And I do remember spending a lot more time in the lab, really thinking about understanding a lot of graphic design principles. And I remember thinking, I'm in a software engineering degree, and I'm using a lot of graphic design principles in what I'm doing and what I actually love to do. So I think that was probably the moment where I was definitely thinking, oh, okay, I feel more motivated and more energized by making this thing look good than actually making the back end services, perfect. So I don't know, that was probably a moment.
So what would you say to any of our listeners that are at that early stage of their career and that's how they're feeling? What advice can you give them about making their way through the industry?
I think that it's really important to focus early on just getting a baseline set of skills around design basics and making sure your fundamentals are incredibly sound, because any hiring manager or recruiter that's talking with you will have a sense of that straight away. Then there's an instant kind of connection you get to someone's portfolio where you can just sort of tell, does this person understand the basics of design? And if they're not there, you're going to find it really hard to get a job that you'll love, because people won't really even listen or look at your portfolio. So I think making sure that you feel so natural in those basics of design, I think are crucial. I think a lot of designers kind of try to, they do a little bit of that basic stuff and then they want to sort of jump ahead and, and they leave that sort of the mastering the basics, if you like, behind. I think that's really important. The other is, I guess, not focusing so much on process. I've noticed that with some of the sort of younger designers that are coming through. We have an internship program at Canva where we do take on some design interns, and what I've noticed with a lot of the portfolios is that they lead with process a lot. So like process being the thing that they sort of show as the thing they're most proud of. Whereas I think pretty much every hiring manager, recruiter is probably more interested in the outcome. What was your goal? What was the problem? What was the goal? And what did you achieve? And yes, we do need to make sure, like it is good to see that the table stakes of having a solid process are there, but that's not really going to be what kind of grows even just your career, like let alone getting a job. If you're really focused as a designer on problems and outcomes and like using your craft to kind of get there, like leading with your design to get there, doing that and just thinking about that constantly, I think will definitely grow you as a designer. And yeah, I guess that's kind of they're the two sorts of things that I see a lot. I guess the other thing that is like a little bit of a something that I've learned a lot as a designer was celebrating like the outcome as well. but the outcome being, what was the business impact? Not just this fancy screen or this sort of fancy, branding or logo, but what impact did that have for your client, or what sort of impact did that have for your team? Not just sort of leaving it at the end. Like I find that, like, sometimes if I'm talking to grads or people that are early on in their career and they're really proud of something that they've designed, and then you ask, you can see they're really passionate about it, and you ask, well, what was the impact? Like, how did you incrementally improve this or that? And they're sort of reaching for, they hadn't really thought that through. I think that shows like a lack of maturity. And I think for designers that are kind of making their way through the industry, having that focus on the outcome and being able to sort of almost lead with it, I think shows, for anyone that wants to hire you, or even if how you want to grow your career, is like, it's a massive like cornerstone to being a designer that a lot of people sort of don't really think about it as much.
Yeah, look, and I think, when you're starting out, you need to be trained in how to communicate that, break it down into the problem, break it down into the actions that you took, and then break it down into the result, which is the outcome that you were talking about. If you can do that and articulate it, then you're the one that's going to get that second interview for sure. One last question for you, Andrew, before we run out of time. What's the one thing you know now that you wish you knew right at the beginning of your career?
It's a very, very good one. I think early on, I've definitely been on a journey myself. I was not a perfect designer early on, and I probably went on the sort of trendy end of things when I was, initially designing, trying to make things like be on trend, trying to make things be really, just sort of fit in with the current trend, if you like. Whereas it took me a while to sort of realize that wasn't really the most important thing. And the most important thing was the most simple design that's almost like timeless. And that's something that takes a bit of time, I think, to sort of realize, because you're sort of, as a designer, sort of, you initially just react to your world and the world that you're in, and you're like, I just want to recreate things that fit inside of this world, rather than thinking, how is this going to be something that's kind of like timeless? Even as trends move on, it stays timeless. I think that's something that I learned. It took me a while to learn as a designer, and it means being really confident, in like what you're designing. That's something that I think I wish I was jumped onto a bit earlier in my career as a designer. I guess one other little thing, I guess for me as well, was data. I think for me, I spent a lot of my career initially, in consulting roles, and then wasn't really until I went and worked at a place like Seek, and now at Canva, where I'm more internal, where understanding how to measure the impact of your design was really important. And I almost feel like I got a bit of an MBA over the last, those years when I started working in those environments, because you have to be relevant in the conversations, you have to be able to talk about data and how the impact the impact of your design, your team's design, especially if you're a leader, like you're batting for your team in these, conversations, and you have to be able to really talk to those points. And I think it would have been better for me to, probably tackle that one a bit earlier, and to understand some of the basics of data a little bit earlier, and master it, and feel like really natural in talking about it with others, and not feeling like, well, I'm a designer, I'll just hear what the analyst says, and I'll just sort of won't question it. Whereas I think that if I'd kind of jumped on that a bit earlier, but I actually feel like designers these days, some of the product designers I meet now are far more native on data earlier. I think maybe that's starting to happen now, where they're far likelier to sort of pick up a dashboard and sort of look at it and think about, how can my design impact this dashboard? And even thinking like, is this the right metric to even measure? So I think I think designers should really think a lot about that stuff. It's incredibly important, especially if you're going to be a leader.
Well, great advice there. Thank you so much for sharing. It's been wonderful spending time with you today, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Vicky, and thanks for having me.
All right, you take care. Hope to see you again soon.
See you.
Bye.